There was once a man named Elliot who lived on the quiet edge of a small town where the streets curved gently and the evenings arrived without hurry. He was neither rich nor famous. No statues would ever be built in his honor, and no headlines would carry his name. He lived alone in a modest house with creaking wooden floors, a narrow kitchen window that caught the morning sun, and an old wooden desk positioned carefully beside that light. Behind the house stretched a garden that seemed almost too large for one person to tend. It bloomed wildly, as if it belonged more to the wind than to the man who cared for it. Inside the bottom drawer of Elliot's desk lay something far more carefully cultivated than the garden. Hundreds of letters rested there, stacked neatly and tied with twine, each one addressed to the same person. Her name was Claire. They had met many years before in a city library. Claire had been standing on her toes, reaching for a thin volume of poetry placed just beyond her grasp. Elliot, searching not for poetry, but for a kind of quiet he could not name, noticed her hesitation and handed the book to her. Their fingers brushed, they smiled politely. That simple exchange became the first sentence in a story Elliot would spend the rest of his life silently continuing. Friendship came easily to them. They walked beside the river on golden afternoons and shared tea in small cafes when rain tapped gently against the windows. They spoke about books, about childhood memories, about dreams too fragile to say aloud to anyone else. Claire's laughter was soft but certain, and Elliot found himself memorizing its rhythm. Yet when it came to speaking his heart, words abandoned him. Each time he resolved to confess what he felt, his courage dissolved into silence. He convinced himself that perhaps love, if true, did not need declaration. Perhaps she would simply know. Then, one autumn afternoon, Claire told him she was moving away. Another city had offered her opportunity, and she felt compelled to follow it. She handed him a small folded note before she left. It read, "Thank you for always listening. You make the world feel gentle." Those were the last words she gave him in person. After she left, the house felt larger and the garden quieter. Elliot began writing letters to her. Every evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills and painted the sky in fading amber, he sat at his desk and wrote what he had never dared to say. He wrote about the scent of rain on soil, about books he imagined she would enjoy, about the way the garden bloomed extravagantly in spring and retreated into itself in winter. He wrote about loneliness in careful sentences, disguising it as observation. In those pages, he confessed everything, but he never mailed them. Each letter was sealed and placed gently into the drawer. He told himself that sending them would burden her with feelings she had never asked to carry. So he kept them, preserving them like fragile petals pressed between pages of time. Years passed with the steady rhythm of seasons. Elliot's dark hair turned silver. Lines traced themselves across his face, mapping the quiet endurance of an ordinary life. His garden grew fuller, almost unruly, yet never neglected. Each morning he stepped outside with deliberate care, tending the soil, trimming stems, planting seeds. For every letter he wrote, he planted something new. One for every word I never said, he would whisper, pressing seeds into earth as though entrusting the ground with his secrets. The garden responded with abundance. Roses unfurled in deep crimson spirals. Lilies lifted pale faces toward the sky. Daisies scattered cheerfully across the grass. What had once been a simple yard became a living tapestry of color and memory. Neighbors began to notice. They admired the beauty, but did not know the devotion behind it. One spring morning, when the air carried the promise of renewal, a letter arrived addressed to Elliot in handwriting he recognized instantly. His hands trembled before he even opened it. Inside, Claire's words greeted him once more. She wrote that she often remembered the quiet man who listened so well and the garden he once described. "If you are still tending that garden," the letter said, "I would love to see it once more." For a moment, time reversed. Elliot felt young again, as if the years between had been no more than a pause in conversation. He smiled, a smile born from patient waiting and a hope he had never entirely surrendered. But life does not always align itself with longing. Days passed, and Claire did not arrive. Instead, another visitor came. A young woman stood at his gate, her eyes carrying a familiar gentleness. She introduced herself as Claire's daughter. It was she who explained that the letter had been sent shortly after her mother's passing. Claire had spoken often of Elliot in her final months. She had described him as a steady presence, a kindness she never forgot. Wanting to honor that memory, her daughter had mailed the letter Claire had written but never sent. Elliot listened without interruption. The news settled over him, not as a storm, but as a quiet snowfall, soft, inevitable, final. He led the young woman through the garden. By then it was in magnificent bloom, petals stirring in the breeze like whispered prayers. Along a simple wooden line stretched between two trees, he had begun hanging some of the letters, allowing them to flutter among the flowers. "Every flower here," he said softly, "grew from the words I never sent her." Claire's daughter knelt beside a cluster of roses, tears bright in her eyes. "Then she must have felt them," she replied, "because she never forgot you." In the years that followed, Elliot's steps slowed, but his devotion did not. He continued writing, though his hands grew less steady. He continued planting, though the work demanded more effort. The garden, as if aware of the love sustaining it, bloomed year-round. When Elliot finally passed away, the townspeople discovered the letters. Hundreds of them, each dated, each carefully composed, none ever mailed. They read of simple observations transformed into profound affection, of love expressed without expectation of return. They walked through the garden and understood that it was not merely soil and seed, but testimony. They began calling it the Garden of Letters. People traveled from neighboring towns to wander its paths. Some came grieving, some came uncertain of their own unspoken feelings. Among the roses and lilies, they found comfort in the idea that love need not always be answered to be real. They read Elliot's gentle words and felt seen in their own silences. Over time, the garden became more than a memorial. It became a reminder. Children ran between the flowers, couples held hands beneath the trees, and strangers paused to reflect on the letters pinned delicately in the open air. The message was simple but enduring. Not all love is spoken aloud. Some love lives in quiet acts of care. Some love is written, folded, and kept close to the heart. Some love is planted in the earth, entrusted to time, and allowed to bloom without witness. And perhaps that is enough. So, as you listen to this story, consider your own unwritten letters. What feelings have you carried gently, protecting them from rejection or misunderstanding? What words remain suspended in silence, waiting for courage or closure? Love does not always demand an audience. Sometimes it asks only for sincerity. Elliot's life was not marked by grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It was marked by consistency, by tenderness, by a garden that transformed absence into beauty. If you ever find yourself holding words you are afraid to send, remember the garden of letters. Remember that even unspoken love leaves traces. It shapes the way we care, the way we tend to small things, the way we nurture beauty in quiet corners of the world. And perhaps today is the day you choose to speak or to write the words your heart has been keeping. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming English stories, only on English Life Tales.